Sorry, Carrie, I lost track of time.
Oh, no worries, no worries. I don't think there's anybody on queue
yet.
anyway. Not yet.
No, I think Doris just signed in.
Okay, we will not let anybody else in until Daryl comes online. And then when he does.
Oh, there he is. Daryl just signed in. I'll admit him right now.
Okay.
Lenny, will we be beginning a bit later or about now or?
Well, Daryl, we're waiting for people to log on to sign in. I don't think we have anybody in queue as of yet. We just opened up the link.
Okay, just let me know when you want to get started and I'll just be right here waiting.
All right, so I just pulled just a couple of points off the internet.
Yeah, that works. And am I a co-host to share a PowerPoint, or can you make me one possible?
Megan, can you make sure that he's able to share his screen?
Yeah, he can share his screen. He just needs to put the share screen and
okay.
He can do it that way.
Okay. So what time are we at? We're at 1:01. Let's give it till about 1:05. Daryl, if that's okay.
Yeah, it works for me. And I'll share my screen when the time comes.
Nahao miigwech. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. It's about 1:07, and in respect of Daryl's time for his session today, 1 to 3, we will start our session. And of course, as people log on, we'll be letting people in. So, we just want to make sure that we keep on track with our agenda. I just want to say Chimigwech for Daryl to be okay with rescheduling his session from last night to today. We just had some unforeseen changes in the schedule. So it's really good that you're able to accommodate meeting with us through our treaty awareness virtual sessions or discussions that we're hosting all week. We've had, we've had Bentley Chichu do presentations Monday, Tuesday, and then again this morning. So let me just see, I'm just letting some people in here. So yeah, very informative. We provided a lot of insight, looking back, historically treaties and treaty making in Canada. This morning, touching a little bit on Manitoulin Island related treaties as well. So we really appreciate his insight, and his message being, sit with the elders, learn as much as you can. That's how you learn, by listening. So we're hoping that providing these opportunities for our community members and our neighbors, our friends, on treaties, that is the big talk these days, especially with the 1850 Robinson-Huron Treaty. So we just wanted to provide the awareness opportunity that this week is providing for people. Having said that, I'll do a quick little introduction of our presenter, Daryl Manitowobi. PhD, is an associate professor in human sciences at the Northern Ontario School of Medicine. He is Three Fires Anishinaabe from Wiikwemkoong unceded territory here in our community, and he currently resides in Whitefish River First Nation. His interest in Indigenous health is the intersection of Indigenous culture, history, theory, and practice with colonialism, health determinants, and Indigenous self-determination. So that's pretty much the highlight, and I know he's very knowledgeable. He comes very, very highly recommended when it comes to discussions like this. So on that note, I welcome all the participants, and I do welcome our guest presenter, Daryl Manitowobi, and I'll turn it over to you, Daryl.
Miigwech Carrie. So we have less. So originally I was scheduled for 6 to 9 last night. So I had things planned in a certain kind of way. So I'm just going to move along here because there's just less time to work with. So just miigwech for everyone coming out. I just wanted to, I have some questions for the group, but I'll just maybe hold off until, I formally start my presentation. So this is just a bit of a story that I want to share that, brings to life history for us. And it really shows how the approach I take is maybe a bit different than Bentley, but I'd like to hear more about what Bentley had to share so that I don't repeat anything he's already stated. But if you look in the picture that I show in the background is in Fraser Bay. And so those of you who traverse the waters of Wiikwemkoong territory will know, that area. And that usually it's rough. The waters are rough because that west wind is blowing pretty strong. Once you're leaving like Birch Island area, for instance, it's kind of sheltered in the McGregor Bay Peninsula area. And then once you enter the Fraser Bay, that's when it's a windy day. And even when you're coming through Lansdowne Channel and you're going through a hole in the wall, and once you start going over that bay, it's windy. Winds coming from the area of Little Current or so. In the background of this photo op, first of all, you'll notice that it's very calm. And that one day that I was on the boat, and the picture was taken while in motion, so it looks like I was taking the picture still on the water, but the water is like almost looks like a sheet of ice. And it was a very calm day that day, and it was just a wonderful opportunity to take a picture. But in the background of that picture is Haywood Island, and some of you have had a chance to visit the place. And there's lots of history about Haywood Island, just building upon what Bentley has shared. I've heard stories of Wiikwemkoong community members living on Haywood Island before the transition to a more of a year-round reserve community way of life. So there's history on that island itself. But the reason why I bring the story up is in 1863, and this maybe has been brought up or will be brought up by others, and maybe even Josh, and so I won't repeat it all in detail. The body of fisheries agent William Gibbard was found ashore on that island, and he had been possibly murdered or fell overboard, or it was an accident. There's many versions of that story, and one of those individuals that was identified as a possible person involved was Ozamaniki of Wiikwemkoong, and he was arrested for that and questioned on it. And the whole incident surrounds a conflict over the fisheries of the area. And if you read the historical record, and I won't go over that in this presentation, I'm just talking about this by way of story. If you read that historical document, Ozamaniki talks about territory and the region as being the sovereign, and in the sovereign hands of the Nishnabek of Wiikwemkoong. And also that he says to Gibbard, and this is the confrontation that happened at Lonely Island. So essentially, this is after the 1862 treaty, and there was a movement towards regulation and allowing more settler involvement in the commercial fishery. Wiikwemkoong had always exercised its sovereign right to the fisheries, and there became a conflict. And one of the rebuttal that Ozamaniki gave was that these are our lands, these are our waters, these are our laws, we have our own. And he basically tells them to leave, that your laws don't matter here, that we were here first, and this is what this is all about. And Gibbard pulls out a pistol and threatens Ozamaniki leaves, and he says, I'm going to be back, and essentially Gibbard leaves with his crew, thinking that more would come, and that was the case. So I just want to share that little story to begin, because these places are still these events are still part of what we see on the land. And every time I traverse this area, and I traverse it quite often, I'll even go to Haywood, and I wonder about that, right? So that island, that's what that island means to me. That island means to me that is where Gibbard was found, and it's because of all of what was happening at that time. The colonial process was taking place. And so that's the reason why I'm sharing that story here. And I'm just going to now go to my sharing here, and okay, here we go. I don't use this too often, so bear with me. And so I just want to see if I can begin my slideshow, play from start. Okay, so you can see that. Can someone say yes or "eh"? Yeah, can you see that? Okay.
Yes, we can see.
Oh,
I can see
sorry.
that.
I'm waiting for people to respond. No, yeah, we can see it.
Share, thumbs up, Jolene, and yes, you had said yes. Okay, so yeah, thank you, Kara. So my approach to things is different, and so I think that, well, maybe not. So maybe I think it's different, and I'll find out, and you can tell me if it's not. There'll be time for a quick break here and there. Well, maybe not so quick, but there'll be time I have some questions for you to consider. So the way that I see things is similar to that story, and stories that I hear, and stories that I hear about some of our community members still exercising that sovereignty over the waters, right? Conflict over net fisheries out in Mantuani Bay, for instance. I've heard community members, arguing with commercial fisheries fishermen, that these are our waters, and I've heard stories of that taking place in other parts. So these things are still there for us, right? And sometimes we don't always remember it, and sometimes and some of us do, and sometimes we're not even aware of it, right? Like, and even if we become aware of it, it awakens us, and for me, that's what this process is all about, right? We have this saying, I just woke up, right? So to me, this is this is all I'm still waking up to all of this, right? And so anytime that I see these places and things, I read things, you know, I'm an interdisciplinary scholar, so I don't approach this as a strictly historical approach. You know, I'm not going to talk. I think I'm not sure if, how many dates I actually have, but they're very few. I'm talking about the way things were and the way and how things are, and also that, you know, identity is connected to that, right? Who we are is connected to that, and it's connected to territory, and this is all connected to history itself. And I've labeled this more than reserves, and I've suggested that I talk about this because when we think about who we are now, the Indian Act of Canada has made us status Indians, and some of us not. But those of us who are status Indians were socialized or enculturated into thinking that we are part of a reserve, and that reserve is a confined plot on a map, and that's all we are. Now you hear about traditional territory and expressing, you know, that fact. And, you know, I was on the weekend, I spent a little bit of time moose hunting. I don't spend enough time. I'm not an efficient moose hunter because I'm too busy with work. My work starts in the fall, and I just try to squeeze it in. So I was able to squeeze in a quick hunt up north of 144, and I hear from community members that are there as well to say that, you know, we need to exercise these rights that we have. You know, we've always done this, and we need to continue to do that. And when I'm out there, I always continually hear stories about how things were, and how, you know, the history of hunting had happened. And so, you know, that's important, and we need to continue that on. So those of you who are hunters and any other capacity, you know, you need to continue that on. I do my best. You know, I'm, as I stated, that, you know, there's just not enough days in the week for me in the fall, and that's when the hunting happens. And so that's where I wanted to begin, just by sharing why I'm taking this approach. And, you know, Bentley has probably done that, and Josh will do that, and others will do that. Ken, you know, maybe there'll be connections with what Ken has to talk about on Friday, if he's still speaking here, just talking about the bigger picture thing. So my objectives of this presentation is to show connection between identity, history, and territory. You know, they're all connected, right? History is something that is not isolated to the past. You know, we are living our history. And if you know the land in the way that you can or should or will, then you will know that it's important, right? Our community members spend a lot of time on, you know, the surrounding lands and areas and places well beyond Manitoulin even in itself. And so that's important for us to know. And this is also to understand the impact of colonization, right? So how did this change things for us? It's important for us to know that, because, you know, that's not good. You know, colonization is not a good thing, right? It's harmful. And so it's important to understand, how did that happen to us? And so there's a bit of a healing process that happens once we know that. And also, I just wanted to show how Anishinaabe history can inform Being. And so this is a, you know, you've probably heard that, and so, you know, I'm going home, you know, returning home, and how that's used. But in the academic world, and this is a, you know, I could tell another story. I could tell a bunch of stories with one slide, right? And then I would run out of time. But the first time I heard this is when James Dumont, who I worked with a little bit at the University of Sudbury Indigenous Studies, he set up this Indigenous graduate program at Seven Generations Institute. And he was wanting to bring back Indigenous knowledge into the university and into a graduate program that was Indigenous run, controlled, and developed. And he was speaking to some elders, and he was trying to explain to them what decolonization meant. And because that's a big word, and it's kind of a confusing word, because it's, you know, it's a Jaganash word. And so it's not Indigenous word. And he had done some time explaining things to about what he saw that as being. And after he explained it, one of the elders responded that, you know, oh, you're saying, you know, but that sounds like Being, right? Returning home to a way that things were, in terms of how we used to relate to one another. And so when I talk about Being, I'm not talking about it as well. I say it when I'm returning home if I use an Anishinaabe, but when I talk about it, I'm referring to indigenous centered ways of knowing, and that's even academic in itself. I shouldn't say that, but I'm returning to Azamanaki. Azamanaki said that we have our own ways. We know how to do things here, and so we don't need you to tell us how we're doing things. And so that's what that means to me. It's not going back in time and trying to freeze ourselves back to a timeless period in the past. It's about returning to Anishinaabe Odzawin is another word that I've heard. And Chinookanagewin is how that informs that, our law basically. But it's basically trying to cleanse ourselves from the damage that colonization has had, and it's messed with our minds. It's messed with how we relate to one another. It's messed about how we think about things. And I think there's ideas in the past that can help us to return back to those places and spaces and ways of doing. And in doing so, it's about self-reflecting on the impact of colonization on self, right? So it's impacted us all. And some of us might not be ready for that. I teach in the classroom. I've taught Indigenous studies in the past, and what I've found is that when we come to terms with this information, this knowledge, it can have an impact on us, because we realize that wow, I didn't know that I was impacted by colonization, or I didn't even know what that was. And it's a journey for many. It's a journey for myself. It's this continual process that I struggle with, but I try to move ahead as best as I can and try to learn as much as I can along the way. Because if we forget, then colonization will be the victor. Because if we forget, then we are no longer who we are. So we must always remember, because that is what our ancestors wanted. When they signed those treaties, or when they didn't sign those treaties, when they interacted with government officials, they were thinking about us. They were thinking about well in the future. And the way that we are, as we're community-based, or we used to be significantly, and maybe that's to a lesser degree to this point in time, but that's what we are. And we are unique contributors to this planet, to this world. And I'd also like to share the Indigenous impact of history in this, and linked to ongoing Robinson Huron treaties, annuities. Just a disclaimer that I'm registered in Wiikwemkoong as a non-treaty, and so part of the Odawa signatories, Potawatomis, who weren't really recognized, but obviously we all have Odawa, Potawatomi, Ojibwe in our backgrounds through that merger of the three fires, and sometimes we recognize that, and sometimes we don't, but that's okay. And so I know that my father, for instance, is a treaty part of the treaty family, and so he would get his treaty money when he was able to get it. And that's a bit of a foreign thing to me. I've never received that, so I can't speak to that. So that's just my disclaimer here. So I just want to disclose that to the group here. And so that's where I stand in this relationship, and I'm okay with that, because there's more things that are more important than that. But I'm not I'm not speaking down to others where it is important. I'm going to quickly speak about the history of Anishinaabe, not in a numbers way. I'm going to talk about it in a different kind of way, talking about the changing family and clan and territory to reserve. I have a question now, Carrie, maybe you're the person to answer this, or someone. What did Bentley talk about, like specifically? Like, I don't want to repeat anything that he's already said. What was it like in depth in terms of the British American or Indigenous British conflicts and all of that? Was that in depth, or?
Yeah, he did do that in his first couple of presentations. He did speak to the role of the Aboriginal and First Nations people in that regard. So he did cover that historical perspective up until the 1850 treaty. I was not able to attend that session yesterday. I had a previous meeting scheduled. So that's pretty much it. Like the the hardcore generic history.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's
is basically what he covered.
okay, that's helpful. So yeah, so miigwech for that. And the reason why I ask is I don't want to repeat anything you've already heard. And so I'll try to do my best to avoid that. You know, where I begin here, you know, understanding me, you know, wenish gin, you know, like who are you, you know, you know, that is maybe an easy question for some to answer. It should be an easy question for us to answer, right? Like we should know who we are, we should know what our history is, and we should know about our connection to what that all means. And unfortunately, that's not the case. And I'm not placing blame on anyone. You know, it took me forever to know just a little bit, right? And that's because, you know, it's not, colonization is not intended for us to thrive, right? It's intended for us to erase who we are, erase our knowledge of our rights, erase a knowledge of our lands and our territories, so that we can become assimilated and then essentially become extinct, right? And one of the favorite quotes I've used before, and this is James Dumont did a presentation, I am told, on Manitoulin Island in the early 2000s. And a member of Ramo Majikining was there and attended and was really fascinated by what was said. And this is a quote that was shared, and you know, I might be wrong a little bit, but essentially he said that you will become Anishinaabe when you stop being Indian. And you know, that really struck me as a you know, basically a synopsis of his presentation back then. And I just have a few key words there just to talk about ideas about how that you know, affected us. You know, Indian, reserve, colonization, Anishinaabe, decolonization, First Nation, Indigenous. These are big words that are used now, right? And but you know, I think we know what this all means, but there's different ways of saying it. There's a bunch of fancy words. But one thing that's really important to know is that it impacts our identity, all of this. And your identity is something that is not only, you know, an abstract conceptual thing that you think about, it's actually something you feel. And it can actually cause happiness or anger in one because of how it happens. And I go through this all the time because I live in Whitefish River with my family here. I'm not a band member. I maintain my band membership in Wiikwemkoong. And because I'm not a band member here, you know, I don't vote, and well, that's fine with me. But I'm not really part of the community because of the Indian Act, because of how it's all set up. And then when I'm back at Wiikwemkoong, it's like, okay, well, you moved away, you know, you're no longer here, right? And so it's almost like all of these structures, these ideas are imposed on us that, you know, you're no longer us because you're them, and you can't be part of us because of the rules of the Indian Act, that sort of thing. And people can get very angry about that, right? And you know, if you're trying to access resources in a community, or if I return back home, you know, people could get very angry that, you know, geez, what's wrong with this? You know, what's this guy's, who does he think he is, right? So what I'm talking about here is these identity ideas, right? And how they create damage. They damage us. They damage us in our relationships. And it's all goes back in time, right? There was a time when that wasn't the case, right? And I'm not going to say that everything was perfect back then, but I'm going to say that things were not as terrible. Well, I shouldn't say they're terrible. They're challenging is the better word. They're not as challenging as they are now, because there were ways for us to deal with things. Like, you know, we were able to deal with interpersonal things. We didn't need social work. We didn't need, you know, foster care, because we had family members who would raise, you know, children if that was the requirement. And we didn't need these schools because we would learn, you know, in different ways, and you know, all of these ideas, right? And now they're part of us, right? So that's the colonial process, right? And now we're trying to move towards changing that, you know, and we're in a different time, you know. Even in my lifetime, you know, some of the things that are said now is I wouldn't have thought they were possible to say, because it was almost illegal to say. It was illegal to say some of the things. And when I mean to say illegal, I mean to say that you know, it's almost like there's a law out there. You can't say certain things, you know, and that's what I mean. And what I mean by illegal is that, you know, people will get very angry. They'll say, you know, what are you talking about? You know, you silly Indian, or you silly you know, First Nation person or Native. You know, I didn't put Native here, but that's more of the, you know, so you know what I mean, because you know, I'm basically looking in the mirror when I speak, because you know, I know you've all had these kinds of experiences. So just want to recognize that that's what I'm trying to accomplish here. And I'm going to start to move quicker here because I'm running low on time here. So I just, this is something, if you've ever taken an anthropology course, this is something you will see. It's called a culture area map, and it showed that approximately at the time of contact, these were, the tribal groupings. This is an American produced publication, so they use American terminology in terms of spelling. Just a really quick story. So like I say, I could talk stories here the whole time here, but I think this is an important story to tell. So, obviously I grew up in Wiikwemkoong, those of you who are old enough to know that, and saw me. And so anyways, I saw you too. So when I was growing up, I didn't learn anything about us. We had our Ojibwe, we had our native language class that would happen. And I didn't know any of this, the Indian Act. I never learned about that. I knew what a status card was and all that kind of thing, but nothing really in detail, nothing really about residential schools. I knew that my grandmother had went, my maternal grandmother had gone there, but no real in-depth stories about that, all those kinds of things, right? I think you've had this experience as well. And it wasn't, and I took, an anthropology background, a little bit in Indigenous studies, but what made me take Indigenous studies was actually, I took a second-year course at Laurentian University. It was called Ethnology of North American Native Peoples, and it was an overview of Indigenous peoples of North American Native peoples of North America. And this is where I first saw this concept of a culture area map. And we talked about we learned about the history of colonization, and that's when it dawned upon me that, I haven't learned any of this, and I should have learned all of this stuff. And that's what pulled me into taking more Indigenous studies classes when I was going to university. But the reason why I'm showing you this map here, because it shows this intertribal presence on these lands. And you can see where our home community is. It says Ottawa, but that's Dawa, and Chippewa is Ojibwe. These are approximate locations. There's archaeological evidence that the Odawa were on this island, and so one of our Three Fires Confederacy nations was, this is Indigenous territory. That's important for all of you to know, because there's a movement that's taking place among some Métis groups to claim that we are all actually American and that we're not actually Indigenous to this region, and that we shouldn't have those rights. And so some of you will need to defend that. And so maybe, if I'm still around for that, I'll help you. But that's a message that I'd like to share with you. But I just want to share this image here just to show that there was a way. And as you can see here, we don't see those little Anishinaabe nation maps where you see those little plots of reserve lands, or Chiefs of Ontario, there's no little plots of lands there. That's important to know, right? Like we didn't have reserves back then, right? We had a sense of territory that expanded upon regions and went afar, right? And that's how it looked. So, we had a material spirituality, we had seasonal ceremonies, we had societies, we moved along, and this is how things were, right? Just a quick origins of Anishinaabe. And I took this from the internet a bit of time ago. I don't know if it's still there, but this is a community member who put this up there, Kenny Pheasant. And so, I won't read it here, but, there's an idea that creation happened, and it connects us to the land itself, to life on Earth. And if you can compare that, what you see here is balance and all of these ideas. And so there's Indigenous knowledge in there, or Anishinaabe Kendamowin, or I don't know if that's the best way to say it. It can be corrected here. I put here, just compare the Benjiget, and those of you who are fluent in Anishinaabe speakers, I hear that word, the Benjiget, it's in the Chinookanagewin of the Anishinaabe Nation, that word, the Benjiget, and it's an alternative word for, the creator, the one who owns the person who owns everything, I just want to highlight that as a comparator. So, obviously we had ideas about creation. There's elements in these ideas. If you read different iterations or examples of it, rock, fire, wind, water, those are part of it. There's this idea that humans are dependent on other beings, and I'm drawing from what I just showed you in the previous slide. There's often a flood event that they talk of. There's many flood events that are spoken of, but with creation, there is one. And also with creation, there's a flood event. The animals existed before, you know, the human beings, and you know, and through Nana Bojo, we learn about the floods and how the world was recreated on the turtle's back. And there are origin accounts that will talk about Mishillimackinac as being you know, the turtle on the turtle's back, the great turtle in, you know, northern Michigan, as we would say it now, but that was you know, Dawa territory. And also even Manitoulin Island is seen as an extension of that, or even be part of that. In our, you know, oral histories that have been written down now for us, you know, there's talk of a sky world where there's thunder beings, thunderbirds that are present, that are with us in the warmer times of the year. There's also the underworld, or the underwater beings, the serpents that are with us always, but, you know, less active when the ice is over them, and so we can talk about them. So I'll be careful not to talk about them. If the time I gave a lecture or talk at the treaty gathering in 2019, some of you were there, and if you remember, what happened is I started talking about these kinds of things, and it started pouring rain really hard. It was bouncing off the roof of the arena. This is where the presentation was, so loud that I was being drowned out, and there was a sound of thunder that was happening. So is that a coincidence? I don't know. Some would say no, some would say yes, but, you know, I just thought I'd bring that up. There's also this idea of this balance between upper and lower worlds, a worldview of balance between power and nature and spirit beings in it. And so, you know, this is all, you know, fine and dandy, you know, ooh, you know, interesting, you know, but, you know, as you know, those of you who are on this call, this presentation know more than I do, that we have stories about that, right? And those stories haven't stopped, and there's even more to learn. These are future curriculum opportunities that some of you who want to be teachers can do. Here is, if you probably recognize this if you've been there, going to Beaverstone, you will see this image, this petroglyph on the rocks. You put some water on it to show it. I went here by myself this time. I had gone with a group, and I was shown where it was, and I've always remembered where it is. And I took this photo myself. And, you know, you can see an image of a thunderbird. You can see other, you know, an image of you know, there's a water being there, and a canoe, typical imagery about being a capsized canoe or something along those lines. I just wanted to show that because this is us, right? This is our part of our territory, and these kinds of things are still there. It's called, you know, Beaverstone, the area, or Chickenishing. Is also a name of it, the chickens, as you're entering it. You go to Beaverstone Bay. The reason how it gets the name Beaverstone, and I've heard this, you know, it's they did this archaeological excavation in this area, and they found this really neat emerald colored beaver effigy that was part of a burial. And so there was, you know, they called it, you know, the Beaverstone. And I've never seen it. I've never seen an image of it, but I've heard talk of it through academic conversations. And, you know, the beaver was important in some way to that part, right? And so, you know, that's you know, part of our history, you know, at some point going back. I just wanted to share that because this is what comes to mind when I go. I don't go to Beaverstone too often, but when I do, I see, you know, this area, and it brings back these memories of this knowledge of the land. Here's an earlier photo of a Mi'kmaq Ojibwe that is written about 1700. Obviously, it's intended to show something intentional, like we're somehow you know, not so fierce, or I don't know how you would interpret that, but I interpret that as in a certain kind of way. What's important there, I think, is that the Mi'kmaq part, you know, a Mick, you know, we know what a Mick is, right? So is that the beaver people, right? I don't know. I don't know that answer. Maybe someone does, but that's just something that I just want to share. Ojibwe encampment on Lake Huron. You know, Paul Kane traversed through the area. Obviously, we were here, right? Either Ojibwe on the North Channel, or other towards Bokting area, or Dawa on the island itself. Just wanted to show you that there. You could, that, you know, background there is familiar. You know, those rocks and the trees on the rocks and that sort of thing. Just to show you that, well, you know, there's ways of showing that we were here. You know, obviously, and that's important to know, because there is this history that suggests that, you know, I've already talked about, you know, these Métis claims that have come across, but also, this idea that Manitoulin was uninhabited when settlers first came here, right? So we must always show that, well, no, and things were happening here, and that's important to know. So we had seasonal movements, right? We have large territory, right? And I went up, it takes me 3 hours to drive to where I went to go hunting, and that's a far, that's distance in itself. That's considered territory. We would move to maple sugar stands to process sugar at that time of the year. When you fish, you need to travel to fish sometimes, and when you gather, you need to do the same. I hear stories of Ron Wakagijikba traveling to the Bruce Peninsula to collect some medicines, right? So because he knew that's where they were, and that's where he had to collect them. He wasn't just restricting himself to Wiikwemkoong Reserve lands boundaries. Hunting, as I've already mentioned, hunting, you need a lot of territory. There's been studies in northern Ontario and the Treaty 9 area that show how much land you need, or you use, actually is the better word to say, to do all of this, to gather, to hunt and fish. And if you look at these maps that have been created, if you look at a map now, it looks like, oh, there's no one there, and then all of these prospectors get excited about that. But if you look at this map, you see that the Northern Cree were using all of the land in some way, right? And that was required for that reason. So they weren't restricted to to Fort Albany, for instance, or Moose Factory, right? The reserve lands, they were, they had to use what they needed. And the animals just don't stay put, right? They're not cattle, right? They're moving, right? And we knew that, and so we would have to use the territory in that way. There was socializing, games, warfare. There's stories of warfare that we have. Wild rice is coming back to an extent, as I've already mentioned. Fishing and hunting. We would move to our family hunting grounds in the winter. Breaking up into smaller groups, and we would go to where we can sustain ourselves in that way. Our political organization, the way that we would function, is through this hereditary model of clans and family heads. What I've come to know about this is that the chiefs back in the day only, and this is no criticism to anyone, so I'm just saying that the chief was one who can convince the group of people to agree to certain conditions or ideas. That we didn't have band council elections back then, and if you didn't agree with that chief or that leader, then you just simply were free to go. There was nothing confining you to that. So as a leader, then you needed to lead for the family, for the community, for others, because that's how you had your role. And if you no longer did that, then they would just say, well, I'll see you next time, right? I'll go follow somebody else if I need to. Religion, we had ways of religion. We had alliances with the Wendat and Southern Ontario. We would attend the Feast of the Dead with them. And so, we had these ways of intergovernmental relations that existed prior to the arrival of Europeans. I just want to show that to you, just because it's important to show that while we were not inferior, savage, uncivilized, we had an actual civilized way of relating, and it's probably a better political framework than democratic societies have, because in those situations that we had, you had to lead for the community. You had no choice. Actually, the community was actually your family, right? So it's kind of hard to be kind of awkward if you didn't follow your family. I was told as well in the early days that when there would be gatherings of chiefs, like for instance the chiefs of Ontario, many family members will go with those chiefs, and they help to inform those decision-making processes, because they conferred with family, because they knew that they were there for that reason. I could go for at least an hour on this slide itself, but I won't, or probably longer. Others will talk more about it, but I just want to highlight certain things. The process of colonization means something very specific. It made us into savages, children, inferior. This is how the Indian Act is constructed, to take our control and power away from us. In history, we were traders with Europeans or the newcomers, and we were valued for that, maybe not treated so great in those transactions. There's a whole history around that. We became allies, and Bentley likely talked about that. And then after we were no longer useful, we became obstacles, right? We need to get the Indians on the reserves, and we need to assimilate them and make them part of us so that they no longer exist. And that's that obstacle we're still faced with. And that's just how it is, unfortunately. And I'm going through that myself. So we're all in this together. 1763 Royal Proclamation really is the foundation of what we have as rights as recognized by what has become Canada. Others will talk about that, or Bentley probably has. War of 1812 was really important for us because it forced us to move as community, this is the time when we sought Manitoulin Island as a safety location, which was part of our territory, given that the American and the British were at war, and we were forced to pick sides. Potawatomi picked sides with the British and were forced out of their territorial areas and joined as the Three Fires, and so on and so forth. Others will talk about that. I'm not going to go into that detail, but it led to what we have now as our communities, because we had to move into what became Canada and leave what has become the US. But our territory is right in the middle of that, right? It's important for us to know that. Treaties led to reserves. Indian Act, we still have that to the present. I've already talked a little bit about what that means for us. Residential schools, we all have family members who've gone there. We don't know what the impact is. It's complicated. It's almost like we're forced to choose what story we say of residential schools. Sometimes it was considered a good experience for some because they were able to learn new things, and for others, they were traumatized because of that. And so I've heard both of those stories. So I'm not going to challenge any of it because it's lives lived and it's actually what happened. So that has had an impact, right? After World War II, 1950s, things started to change. The Jean Chrétien, who is the Indian Affairs Minister, proposed the white paper in 1969. It mobilized community members. I remember community members talking about this a little bit. And also there was a response with the red paper of trying to maintain us. So, this is the history that we have, right? One of the benefits that I have, and others have a better benefit than I do, is growing up in a time when the TV was something that was unreliable. There was 2.5 channels, I say 2.5 because the third channel wouldn't always work, or was too fuzzy sometimes. And some of us had fuzzy all the time, but we had to do other things, and I would just hang out and do things and learn these things. By not trying to learn, people would just talk about them. I heard stories about the movements after the War of 1812 by elders, and just talking about the Americans, right? Chumukmaanak, right? The big knives, and just even just hearing some words here and there, and it was kind of sprinkled in my upbringing. So we need to bring more of that back, Samar. And so hopefully that's what we're going to do. So we're going to take our first hybrid break workshop. And so what I'd like you to do is, over the next 10 minutes, so if you need to go to the bathroom, or if you're a smoker, you need to go for a smoke or whatever, or if you're with your family, go over these questions, and then we'll take them up after 10 minutes. I'll ask for volunteers to do so, and you can share what you know. And I admit that I don't know everything, right? I'm still learning, and I think that's a good thing, and we can share our knowledge here. Did you want to say something, Carrie?
No, okay, no, I'll just acknowledge that. So 10 minutes from now, so we're looking at 2:00.
Yeah, 2:00. So let's all come back here and think about this. And we could spend half an hour on this, so we'll just spend a few minutes. So we'll ask for volunteers, and then we'll take these questions up and we'll move along here. So at 2:00, so it's 10 to 2 now, and so we'll come back in 10 minutes.
Thank you much.
Okay, are we back? Or some of us back? Oh, I didn't realize I changed. Sorry, I walked away and I must have changed. Did I change the slide when I walked away?
Yeah, you did, and you left,
Sorry.
so we can do nothing.
Sorry, I
I
didn't
don't know if
realize that.
anyone, I don't know if anyone took like a mental picture where you just like, okay, took a picture, it's in my mind.
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay.
So, well, yeah, let's ask. I'll ask the question if we can have a volunteer. I think you've had a chance to take a break and stretch your legs. What is our history? And I guess that's a big question, right? Can I have someone volunteer just to say something brief? That how this goes, right? When we're in our circles, this can go on for a couple of hours. And then we keep the conversation going, and then the presentation is over. Anyone want to offer some thoughts there? Okay, so I'm going to suggest that you think about this. One of the last thing that I'm going to ask at the end is that you share what you were thinking, here with our time together. And that was my request for others to share ideas and to value what you learned. I'll just give you an example of something that I heard once. And this is not always a lot of detail, right? So when the U.S. wondered about the displacement of the Potawatomi, and they had come to Wiikwemkoong to start collecting family names about who was displaced and all of that, and there was a lot of debate happening about that, right? And I remember, I think it was Ron Wakagijikbal who I think was the leader at the time, or maybe part of council at the time, stated that we're all together, we're all family here, and we can't be arguing about this because we're all community here, and it's not about being a Potawatomi or not. It's recognizing that ancestry, which is kind of a very brief way. But Tawny, you have something to share? Go ahead.
No, I just want to say that I'm just really learning a lot again. And I just want to say that I first learned about all this history, well, some of it anyways, was when I went to school at Laurentian as well in the Indigenous Social Work program. And yeah, like you said, Daryl, that I was just awakened into all the history because we didn't learn it growing up at all, hardly. And I'm just very thankful for the stuff that I did learn and continuing to learn. And even like I just finished reading a book by Cecil King called Balancing Two Worlds about Jean Baptiste from 1768 to 1866. So I learned a lot of history there about the region, the Great Lakes regions. And then also I just started the Wiikwemkoong Diarium by Shelley J. Pearson. And it's very, very interesting too about these diaries that some Jesuits wrote when they were living back in 1844 to 1853 at this time anyways. And just learning about the different, like how they lived back then and what went on and who were these people, and it's, I don't know, I just really, really enjoying all of it. So miigwech.
Yeah, miigwech, Tawny. Yeah, so one of the things you just want to emphasize that, I'm asking you, I've asked you if you're passing on this history, that those of you who know it, and if you are, how are you doing it? But I think that we all should, right? We all have a responsibility. We all need to work together on this. All of what I said, not one of us can do it all on our own. We need to come together as a community to work on this and to teach our younger ones, because they're the ones who will carry this on. And I once told someone that we had to explain why we do these kinds of things. My answer is that I have no choice. It's an obligation, because those who went before us did it so that we can benefit as best as we could, and we have a responsibility to give back to that, right? So some of our community leaders who are no longer with us, you know, they had some ideas to share, and they wanted us to do things in a particular way, and they left us those stories about how to do things. And some of us are collecting those stories. You know, we have community members going about collecting those stories, and through the band office and the union and so on and so forth. So it's important to know this stuff, because this is who we are and this is where we come from. And so I just want to emphasize that we all have a responsibility. Changing Anishinaabe family plans, you must be thinking, well, what does this have to do with history? Like, you know, well, what does that mean? I think I'm actually answering this already, you know, what this all means. You know, Neen, Keen, Ween, Kinawea, is this all of us? You know, is this impacting? And I'm going to go rather quickly here. This is kind of confusing if you've never seen it before, but, you know, we all live it. This is how kinship diagrams are drawn when people want to understand how families are, and they would draw these diagrams. And the rectangle, I mean, the rectangle, the triangle means person, so ego is person, the circle is female, the triangle is male. And we have different words for all of these folks, these people who are here, right? We might think, you know, cousin is just cousin, but, you know, back then we would call, you know, our fathers, brothers, kids, our siblings. You know, they would be our brother and sister, and our mothers, sisters' kids would be our siblings as well. They would be our older brothers or our younger sisters, or so on and so forth. That's how we gave those names. I haven't memorized all of these names. I had them written down at one point in time. We're losing some of this. So there's different kinds of uncles, basically, and different kinds of aunts that we have, and this is how this looks. And those who, like mothers, brothers' kids, were, you know, a little bit detached from us, and they were our cousins. And, you know, the father's sister's kids were the same. And so we would have different names. We have names for you know, eldest son, eldest daughter, and then those before, you know, below that, the youngest, we would have names for. This all represented responsibilities that we had in the family, and how we were all connected. So we had our own way of relating to one another, is what I'm trying to show there. I show this, I've showed this before, you know, this idea of how we enter this world and we move along, and we're confronted with challenges. I actually need to invert this. That's an error that I have here. But anyways, it means that we're faced with challenges in this life, and that we need to overcome them. And this is our philosophy of life, and we exit at the end if we're able to accomplish those challenges. And if we don't accomplish them, then, you know, we have a, you know, we're not able to fulfill this full path in life. I like this image. I was at a conference one time, and I was talking about why I like this. I shared the same story, that the reason why I like this photo is it shows our territory before Canada and the US were you know, what they are now. And I was basically going on and on about this, and someone was so disappointed in what I had to say, got up and walked out of the room, right? But anyways, it is a fact, and that's what it is. And so when we look at this, we're not seeing those little tiny you know, reserve settlements. We're not seeing the border with Canada and the United States and all of those other things. This is how it actually is, right? But we have these rules that were forced upon us that make us think differently here. But I just want to highlight this area here. This is really a continuity, right? All of this is a continuity for our ancestors, right? They would move along here, and they would move all around here, and they would even move afar, right? So there's a lot of movement that was happening. You can't hunt and stay in one spot, right? It's not possible, because the animals there's movement in animals. You hunt in certain areas and all those kinds of things. So I just want to emphasize that there. The shapers of identity back in the past, I talked about our current identity and how that's connected to the Indian Act and that. And so, you know, the environment shaped our identity. I gave an example of that. You know, we were individuals in families, and families were part of communities. You know, we have this idea, we've had this idea that our name is predetermined, associated with nature. Some of us have Anishinaabe Noswin, and, you know, that's, you know, usually connected in some way to that. You know, in the past, we had these quests to find our identity. and we had these spiritual connections that would become of them, that would result from them. We would have spirit helpers who would help to shape our behavior. It's almost as, you know, that stronger being that would help us to behave in the right way. Because if we didn't, there was this idea that we had, and some of us still have this idea, that we must be respectful to one another, because if we're disrespectful to another person, they could use that energy against us, and they can, you know, use that negative energy to make us sick, and we can become sick because of that. And this is all of these ideas. It was a law of human relationships. And there's also a relationship with the land, with the medicines, with the animals, that we had to be respectful, that we couldn't over harvest, and that we needed to be respectful of the animal remains, and we needed to ask the animal to surrender themselves. And so, you know, we had political and social roles. I won't go into this. You've seen these images, you know, these clans, you know, this is an example of that. The leaders, the fish intellects, the bear, who's the healers, and the peace. There's different ideas here. The deer as the mediators, the bird as a spiritual. I've thought a lot about this, and this is my answer to this question. You have your own answer, and I ask you to think about that. What does name and family mean to you? So sometimes we will say, you know, our totem, you know, our clan. You know, we all have that. Maybe we might not have that name that we give to it, but we all have that connection to a family, right? And that's just how we are, right? We're still like that, right? In our communities, that, you know, we have family arrangements, and sometimes we have family divisions based on that, and that's really continuing all of this, right? I've done a little bit of work in this area where, you know, we might not know our clans, but we still act like we are part of clans. We still behave like we're part of clans, and we have some tendencies, and it's not always the case, but we have situations where, you know, some families may be good hunters, for instance, good providers, and that seems to carry on, which makes a lot of sense, right? If you hang around your elder hunter parent or brother, then there's a high probability that you're going to be one too, right? And or know at least how to do it, right? And if you're leaders, right? If your family is part of a leadership role in community, you hang around with them, so there's a, you know, likelihood that you'll know something about it, right? And you can continue that on. We all had roles to play. We still do. We still have those responsibilities, and they're responsibilities actually, right? So I write here social political roles, but they're responsibilities that we have. And so that's just something I just wanted to share. You may have seen this 4 directions teachings, just some ideas here about different directions. I'll just move along here a bit at a quicker pace here. I want to get over everything, cover everything. So the seasons mean something, right? They still do. Well, you know, it's getting colder outside, right? So, you know, it means something, because you have to put on warmer clothes, and, you know, things start to change, and all of that. You know, there's different ideas about the stages in life, right? As a child, you know, we're Benojis, you know, I've, you know, heard that idea shared, that, you know, we're this little spirit, that we're pure in spirit, and that, you know, we're close to those spirit beings when we enter this world, and you know, that's why children are important, because they represent that. And for the youth, you know, it's a time of vision and preparation, when we need to begin fulfilling our purpose. And, you know, sometimes this is, you know, shown in a circle diagram. This is the one I've chosen, but, you know, there's others. You know, you can just, you know, talk about this. There's there's the 7 stages of life, for instance, is another teaching around this. There's the West, you know, adults, we fulfill our vision. Elders, we have wisdom. We're at the highest point of our education, because we've lived a long life and we have a role to play. And so, you know, these were part of our communities, and this is how we thought of these roles to play. And we all had these interconnections. An elder was responsible for teaching those younger ones, and we were responsible for respecting the elder for that reason. I grew up in that time period. It's a bit of a different time now. Some of this is being lost, but I grew up when if an elder spoke, you know, you sat down or you listened, you know, and you respected what that elder had to say, because they earned that right to share what they have to share, because they've lived a long life, and they've, you know, it's a designated role that they have, and they have that responsibility. You know, death is a new beginning, life is a temporary state, and this is all abound in the places that we see. You know, the Milky Way is a lifeline to linking the past to the future. So all of these ideas were all part of nature. I'm showing you this to show you that it was all part of our surroundings. You know, you might be wondering again, like, why am I talking about this, right? You know, vision quests would happen on the land, and you would have a vision, you would have a purpose, and they would, you know, these visions were held in secret because your power might get lost. The females fasted also as well, fasted closer to home. You know, the female vision may have happened, and sometimes it wouldn't, but it meant that females all had a role to play by recreating life and the power of the female. These are, you know, part of ceremony. If you go to ceremonies, you'll know more about this than I do. I'm talking about this just as at the teacher level, you know, because that's just what my role is as a teacher. And once you had that vision, you prepared for it, and you sought it out. So this was going to be my next question, but in the interest of time, I'm going to actually, you know what? I'm going to actually ask I think we have some time, because I've been going a bit quicker here. So how do things look? And we won't take a break this time. We just had one recently here. So what does this all mean now? Like what is the meaning of family now, and what is the meaning of being a youth going to adulthood, and what is the meaning of community, and what has contributed to these changes? And just asking just a general question, if you want to maybe answer one part of this for the group, if you want to think about that, or even put it in the chat if you prefer that, you want to spend more time answering this question.
I just want to make a note, Daryl, if you need to go beyond 3 o'clock, you can. We can stay online till like 3:30. So I don't want you to feel like you're rushed. So I sent you that message. If you need to go beyond 3, we're not going to just go, we're not going to shut it off.
Okay.
I know you would like to have good conversation and feedback from the community. Meaning of family, clans, cousins, you know, for me, if I would just say like, that's my connection to history. I will admit I don't know too much history, you know, in relation to my community itself and the origins of the community. That's why I'm involved with these sessions, but that's what my family means to me. It's that connection and sharing their stories and trying to go back deep and find out who's who. So that defines me, who I am, and pretty much where I'm going. And I use that fuel to move forward.
Miigwech, Carrie. Just want to acknowledge also Sandra had shared earlier on about Anishinaabe refers to all Indigenous peoples. There's no separation. As a 64-year-old, I'm still learning about us. I was taught about Marco Polo, Cartier, etc., even from my community member teachers. The only thing I was taught was how to speak, read, and write my Odawa language with being outdoors. Miigwech, Sandra, I'll just tell a quick story about that. You know, I grew up, well, I've already mentioned that, but the first time I've ever heard culturally relevant curriculum was in grade 3. And my teacher was Rita Corbier at the time, and was a teacher to many of us. And I still remember this. I was, you know, I'm not sure why I remember it, but anyways, we were doing a geography lesson, and we were shown, you know, different parts of the world, features. I think we're learning about continents and oceans, maybe. And we were asked about the Indian Ocean. And I can't remember the exact question, but I know it was a question about the Indian Ocean. And, you know, why is the Indian Ocean named that? Or maybe it was something like that. And, you know, as kids, you put your hand up and you would try to raise as far as you could. And, you know, because you wanted the teacher to call upon you. And I was one of those, you know, at that time I was, well, at maybe that lesson, I was that kid, right? Just trying to reach really high because I thought I knew the answer. I reached as high as I could in the classroom. And I said that, you know, we came from the Indian Ocean because we're Indians. And that's, I thought I knew the answer. And I was really proud of myself. And I remember Rita responding to say that, just acknowledge my response and just to say that, we come from here and because we've always been here, right? And talked about, where we came from. That was the first time I ever came across, culturally relevant education as what it is now called. And also, those little Daphne Ojic, Nana Bosho books that we all read. Some of you have had that same experience. But that just came to mind when Sandra had talked about that we don't really share what that means. Anyone else want to add to this? Educator, grateful that our education system now has land-based learning, programming, and cultural mentors, elders in our schools to bring back culture and language. The markers of childhood adolescence I learned from one side of family and from attending university. Yeah. So, things have changed, right? We didn't have Indigenous studies, Native studies at the university until the 70s, if you were lucky, but it's only recent that these have started to change, right? And so that's a good thing. The reason why I bring this up is, sometimes we need to take some time to think about how things are now and how things were before. And, we would have responsibilities. I remember growing up a younger person, it was just a different way. I remember I was having a conversation with, I think I was talking to Henry Pitawanakwit last week. I was talking about, I can't remember what I was talking, like exactly what I was remembering growing up. I used to live I'll just give you this example. I used to live behind the arena in a brown house. And I used to go to nursery school, and I would walk there myself, all by myself as a young kid. However old you are when that happens, we would never let that happen now, right? Across the road, there was no crossing guard there, and I'm not saying that that this is wrong now, but I'm just saying how it used to be, and it was like we trusted that children can go along and do their thing, and others would care for them if that needed to be the case. I also lived in Kaboni, and I lived across from the Shawandas there. And I used to walk to the Kaboni school, and I would jump over the fence, and I would cross over the field where Sam was Ba, those Omics there. And I would, take that little shortcut there. And I did that from, I think, grade 1 and grade 2, I think, because I went to school in Kaboni school till grade 2. And so I would do all of these things, right? And just I was thinking back, I said, oh, geez, that's interesting. A little kid, we would think now, if we saw that happening, we would maybe call social services to say that, someone's not watching over that kid. But that's just how things were back then, right? We had ways of relating with one another, and community meant something. And I'm not trying to be all nostalgic here. I'm just saying that this is how things used to be at one point in time. Things have changed, and there's if we have these stories, then we'll know that there's other ways of thinking about these. What's contributed to these changes, right? So I also hear a lot from community members this story that they were raised by their grandparents, right? And sometimes they'll go into details to say, well, my mother couldn't raise me or something along those lines, and I was raised by my grandparents. And I like having conversations with those individuals because I can understand some Anishinaabemowin, speak some Anishinaabemowin, but when I hear them speaking, you can tell that they learned their dialect from their grandparents because they're just the way it sounds, right? And so that was how our social work programs used to work in the past, right? If family had to take care of family, it was an obligation. It's something that you needed to do, and that's just how things were for us. And so just reflecting upon that and how our roles and responsibilities are. This is now part 3, the third part, and this is some of you who attended the one-day conference that we had on Victoria Day, or actually no, the day after Victoria Day at the Ojibwe Cultural Foundation this year. We had a gathering there sponsored by the Wawindamogan Robinson Huron group, and we held it on a day that honored, and this is not we had plenty of dates to choose from, and so this is the one that worked out well. There was a petition that was signed by the Chiging Chiwetanong community members against the 1862 treaty, and it was done on that date back in May in 1863. And so we chose that date. Well, it was one of the dates for consideration, and so that's the symbolic reason for that. And we thought it was important for us to gather on a settler holiday, which is Victoria Day, to honor Queen Victoria, but to share Anishinaabe stories, or even to share some ideas, and to do a lot of what I'm doing here now, to bring us together and to start doing things differently, and to just no longer be ashamed or afraid to do these things that are needed to be done, and to remember those who came before us, and to honor them, because it's our responsibility. It's our responsibility, and if to do otherwise is not honoring their contribution. So this is the presentation I gave. So if you heard it before, I'm going to repeat it here. Actually, I only was given 15 minutes, so I went really quick. So I'm not going to go so quick with that as that time. So this gives me time to expand upon that. I gave this at the Ojibwe Cultural Foundation. So Shkungun, a native Anishinaabe narrative dispossession of Dabalmanis. Dispossession is an academic word, so it's the word they use in universities now to talk about the loss of land, right? It's really about loss of land, and narrative is a story, right? So this is written as a academic title, but it really means a story of how we lost Manitoulin Island. And Shkungun, and I'll talk about that, and those of you who are Anishinaabe specialists will know that it means something very specific. So when I did this presentation, I talked, and some of this I'll be coming back to what I mentioned already. But I showed that picture there as well, and I've already explained why I like it. I talked about some terminology here, and I'll do it so again. I'll give a background of Manitoulin. Some of you will know as much or more. Historical overview, and I call this a damage-centered narrative, and that's again an academic term that is used. It basically means that ways of talking about history or things may be deliberate in creating harm. Like there's an intention behind that, right? You're sending a message, right? You're sending a message about something very specific, and it's actually creating damage, right? It's creating damage to a people, or it's creating damage to an individual. And I'm not suggesting that we rewrite history, but I'm suggesting that we actually tell history. So we haven't grown up in those times, and we're only now starting to do that. Like we've heard these stories from elders who would talk about it, but they were not given the platform that they needed. And so what I talked about then too is that learning about Indigenous history and knowledge of the land is medicine. It's medicine because it gives us a purpose. It tells us about what our responsibilities are. We need that reason to do things that we were told to do. It's the instructions that were given to us by our ancestors, that we must continue to do this and tell stories about these places, and to keep on using these places. And if we know about that, then it becomes a way of healing. It's a way of healing because it means that we mean something. It also means that we have a connection to one another. It means that we have a responsibility. And when all of these things come into place, you have a purpose. You're like, oh, I have to do this. It's my role. It's my job. You have a job, so you could fulfill that. And so that's what this has been for me. Much of what I've done here, I don't approach it again like the historians would. I approach it in the stories of the past and of the land. I talked a little bit about Otsokan and the Bajmoen, and history is our ways of talking about the past, right? The Otsokan are those legendary stories of the past, and the Bajimawin are, you know, stories of the past in itself. But Atsokan are things that are alive. You know, they're persons. They're alive. They have life. The Bajimawin is you know, stories of the past. So terminology, you know, this is what I've heard. You know, others can that are specialists can correct this, or you want to type it in the chat if I'm wrong in any way. I acknowledge that I'm not always right, so feel free to add more or to correct me. So Shkungun is what we call the reservation or reserve. I always hear that word, right? We in Anishinaabe, when people are speaking our original language, you know, they would talk about, there's no, the word for reserve that they have is shkunganing, right, at this reserve, at this place. And I heard from one that this actually means the land that's left over, right, the leftovers, right? So what does that mean? It means that actually, well, we had more, but this is all that we have left over, right? And so this is really the purpose of this presentation, is it's more than reserve, right? And we fight and we talk about the leftovers, right? But we don't, you know, fight enough about, we're doing something about this in Wiikwemkoong, trying to regain the, you know, surrounding islands. But, you know, we don't always talk about, you know, what the bigger picture, you know, we're given some money over it and that quiets us down, and you know, but that doesn't solve the problem. And so again, Atsokan, legendary stories, sacred stories. You know, some have, well, maybe most, but you know, these are only supposed to be told when the snow hits the ground, because the thunderbirds have gone to the south, and the underwater beings are trapped under the ice because the ice has formed, and we won't. I'm not going to tell any of those stories, so don't worry about it. But because I tried to do so in Wiikwemkoong, and I was almost rained out by doing so. Anyways, you know, they were stories that would only be told at certain times, and you had to be careful about this. And I come across, you know, when, you know, the thunderstorms, you know, some a smudge was made, or some tobacco was offered, or something along those lines, right? So some have still practiced these things, and they still do. So I respect that, and that's important, because that's how it is. The Majmawin is, you know, narrative story. They're not alive. And some might do this differently, like Atsokanak, you know, I don't know if they would say Atsokanan, you know, maybe people would make that not alive. I don't know. I've made it alive. The Bajmawinan, you know, I don't know if people would say the Bajmawinak, you know, I don't know, maybe someone can correct me there, but I think we would say the Bajmawinan, stories that are not alive, that exist. So we heard about, you know, you'll hear from some that the original name for Manitoulin Island is Dawaminis, and I put Dawaminis there because, you know, in our Odawa dialect, those of us who can speak it very well, we drop a lot of we drop a lot of vowels. You know, we don't say Anishinaabe, we say Anishinaabe, right? We just kind of condense it. We don't say Dawaminis, we say Dawaminis. We don't say Minobamadzwin, we say Minomadzwin. You know, we break it down, right? And some will use the word Mininominising. That's the more contemporary word that we see. We have the United Chiefs of Councils of Mininominising. And also in terms of terminology, you know, and this is coming from the Indian Act of Canada, reserve means a tract of land that has been set apart by Her Majesty for the use and benefit of a band, right? So that's the actual legal definition. And that's what we have come to know, right? It's a tract of land that has been put aside for us for our benefit, right? And you know, that's a problem. I think that's a big problem, because it means that our territory has been taken away from us, and we're just left with this shkungan, the leftovers, and that's where we'll live. That's basically what that means. In terms of archaeology, you know, I'm just going to talk a little bit about, I won't talk a lot about that. I'm not a practicing archaeologist, but I know a little bit about it. I had to learn a little bit about it. But, you know, I bring this up because, again, some of you are, you know, maybe if you're older like me, you know, your children or your grandchildren will you know, get into law or land rights or land claims or something like along those lines. You know, there is evidence that there was an Odawa village in Providence Bay. You know, that's, you know, the artifacts are there, and, you know, it's an Odawa village because it's very similar to other Odawa villages. So, and this is late pre-contact, which means that just before the arrival of settlers or Europeans or newcomers, Jaganash, you know, this is what was there, right? And so that demonstrates, you know, evidence that we were here, right? And so I just wanted to share that, because, you know, this idea that, oh geez, this is an empty place when others came, right? And, you know, others will talk about this too, and maybe Bentley has already talked about this, that Champlain met the Odawa at the French River, 1615. He was going up the Odawa, the Ottawa River, going down, you know, went down Mattawa and came down the French River. He was traveling to see the Wendat, and he had come across the Odawa peoples, and they said they were picking blueberries. They probably weren't, probably going to war with the Haudenosaunee in the south, and that was their cover, right? Oh, we're just here picking blueberries. And so that's how history writes it, but it was probably something else. So, you know, we have that's evidence of territory there too, right? So obviously we're there at the French River. So, you know, that speaks for itself. You know, there's this history of the first Jesuit, who is often credited as the first European to Manitoulin, being 1648-49, Poncet. And if you remember, some of you have seen this, there used to be a sign at 10 Mile. There is still a sign. It's been a while since I stopped at 10 Mile Point. Anyways, there used to be a sign there that said, you know, the first, I can't remember what the title is, but the first visitor to Manitoulin was the Jesuit missionary Poncet. And if you've been to 10 Mile Point, you know, obviously, you know, if you're looking for a place to camp, you know, would you camp way up there? You know, go get some water and walk way up there? No, you wouldn't, obviously. Too much work. And so, you know, you would go to, and it's not a sheltered bay either, right? It's right into the peak. So obviously it's done for tourism purposes, probably to try to get some people to stop by there to buy some books or something, I don't know, or some crafts. Is there a question? I heard something there. Or am I needing to? Okay, so I'll just continue on here. So anyways, another something for us to do would be really neat. I'll do this as a call out to a community member. Maybe you've already heard this, or maybe someone has already done this. And if that's the case, then maybe I don't know. But it's likely that this place was our community, Wiikwemkoong. And if you look at it from the neat thing about you know, archaeology and all these kinds of things is you know, you kind of do what makes sense, right? It's like if you were traveling in a canoe and this is what, you know, why the sailboats seek refuge in these coves, right? They want to get out of the wind. They want a sheltered area where they can kind of enjoy things, right? And what do you need as humans? We need water, we need food, we need you know, shelter. And if you look at it and you know, on a map, or even if you just, better yet, just go there, you know, that the Wiikwemkoong Bay is a sheltered bay, right? Shelters from the west wind, and you know, it's, you know, there's some who believe that that's actually where Poncet was. He was actually in Wiikwemkoong Bay there, Smith Bay as it's now called, and there was a family there, or maybe more than one family, and he wintered there. So, you know, it's likely that was the case. It's probably, and I've been told this, and someone, you know, I hope that some of us can do some work on this. It's probably, you know, closer to the Cape Smith, and you know, I'm not saying way up there, but I'm saying, you know, as you were, you know what I'm talking about there, because there's a little river there going up to the old dump there, and Murray Hill, and, you know, I'm saying my age here, I used to have a dump up there. But if you follow that, there's a little river system that goes, so you know, some of us should look into that. It'd be really neat to find out, just because it shows that we were always here, right? That's important for us. Originally, we were known as Ottawa Island. Andrew Blackbird wrote about this. You could get this online now, a PDF of it. History of Odawa people. He writes about Manitoulin Island, and he calls it Odawa Island. That's the land of our people, right? So there again is some evidence that this was part of the territory. That, you know, we just didn't happen to stumble upon it, or maybe come to an empty place. It was always there, and we we enjoyed it and used it. Frederick Major wrote this compilation. Well, he didn't write it; he compiled it. So he put together as a compilation, wrote the introduction, preface, and in it, one of the indigenous peoples, an Anishinaabe person who he spoke to, told him that, the great master of life created our ancestors and set them down on Manitoulin. So this is where I get that idea, that, for some, this was our place of creation, that Manitoulin Island is our turtle island, for some, and maybe that was for more than some back then. And, there's this idea that evil spirits descended on the island or came on the island and set fire to it in 1700. You come across these stories here and there, some of this has been written down. One of the things that I'm going to work on, well, maybe sooner than later, is using science to find this out. Exactly when did that fire happen, right? There's people who do research in this area, and so that's one of the things that I'll be working on in the future, is finding out when this happened. There's ways of figuring this out, and so, and I was told that happened, and so there might be some symbolism around there, but it might be literal, like they actually left, or it could be, maybe there was disease that came about that wiped out, the communities, and they needed to leave, and they set fire on it to clean it, and so that's something that we hope to learn more. Oh, I hope to learn more about it, and I hope you do too, because it fills in a little bit of the gap here. So this is Manitoulin Island history in brief. Some of you have read this. There's the Frederick Major compilation that I spoke of. It's really a collection of different things that he put together. He's based in Fort Bay, part of the, what became the Recorder newspaper. He's an editor, amateur historian, put together these different things, and that's the first book history of Manitoulin Island. Whiteman, who was a historical geographer, was at the University of Waterloo, wrote a book called Forever on the Fringe, 6 Developmental Studies of Manitoulin Island. And we held this gathering in May, and we called it Never on the Fringe. And the reason why we did it is for the reason I already stated, that, when you hear the word forever on the fringe, what does the fringe mean? Like it's way over there, and it's at the end of something, and it's not important. And, when I first read that, I was like, this is very biased, right? It's that damage-centered narrative that I spoke about before, as if we were never here before, and, we had no role to play. And one of his chapters, and, I'm kind of picking on him, he's a product of the times. It's more of an idea, not necessarily a person. Nebulous North of 1836, saying that, well, there was not much that was happening in the North until 1836, right? When all of the white people came, that's basically what that means, right? If you want to say it exactly what it means, that's what it means, right? And so that's a damage-centered narrative, right? It's all of a sudden we're like, oh, geez, we must be grateful for others because we didn't have anything to write about. Shelley Perrin, wrote Exploring Manitoulin, really a tourist book, but the good thing about Shelley's book, as it changed things, is that she spoke to people. She would speak to people and get some quotes to add to some local history, some the first, oral history in a book form that started to be part of the record. And so that's something, if you haven't read, you read a little bit more about that. Teresa Smith was I think she's still active. She was at OCF a couple of years ago, a religious studies professor at a university in Pennsylvania. And she wrote Island of the Anishinaabe, and did basically an oral history of the island. All of these stories about the land and the water beings and all of these things. And it's a really good book if you haven't read it, because it collects those stories of the elders that she was able to talk to, some of whom are no longer here. Deary put together this history of Manitoulin in the region, starting to change things, putting in archaeology, starting to break apart this damage-centered narratives. There's the Jesuit letters and memoirs, so you can read about that. I don't know if they're still for sale. They used to be at Anderson Lake near Espanola. I don't know They're still there, but I bought them, and they're in other places, probably in libraries. The Jesuit wrote letters. They wrote them in French. They were translated, and you can learn a little bit about our past through their words, but obviously it wasn't the whole story. Ojibwe Cultural Foundation in 2011 wrote Stories of Our Elders, and you can hear better versions of what I've stated of some of the things through those stories that they were writing. Perrin and wrote Indigenous Voices and the 1862 treaties, and so things have changed. And the reason why I talk about this is because that is how we know the past, right? Historical narrative, and so some of you drive by Shigwenda and you see that sign 9,500 years ago, and you wonder like, oh geez, what is that all about? And so there was again archaeological evidence that there were humans here not that far back, right? So I was very quickly version of this story, I would have said it longer, but I was working in Shigwenda at one point in time, and I was doing my master's at the time, and working with the archaeology and tourism. And this is when it all came to focus, right? Like, why are we saying that there was nothing here, but there's actual tools, stone tools here, right? And so that's evidence, right? But meanwhile, the historians are writing these versions of the past that are not true. They're not, because there's more that needs to be written. So some of you who want to go on to school to do more about this, I encourage you to do so we can fill in those gaps. I've already mentioned the missionary Poncet to Manitoulin, which was likely Wiikwemkoong. This abandonment story that we were gone, how do you make sense of that? I've heard like Alan Corbier will say that, well, that's just a Jaganash reason or justification for coming here, right? So they're using that as justification, which may be true. I could see how that could make sense. So it'd be interesting to know more about that. We need to learn more about that. 1836 is when Prue comes to Wiikwemkoong and sets up a mission to service the region. There's the 1836 Treaty of Manitoulin. There's the 1862 treaty. The post treaty, writes about the relationships that we have. If you start to read the history, what you see is that there's gradual agitation or conflict, tension between the Anishinaabe on Manitoulin and the settler communities that were growing, the Jaganaashuk that were becoming. And taking over. People wanted to buy more of the island, and people were trying to buy as much land as they could, and there was conflict, and there's history of the chiefs writing against that, right? And that's after 1862, because things are starting to change. And then you have the fisheries dispute in 1863 that I talked about William Gibbard. You have industrial schools. The first the precursor to Spanish residential school was at the ruins and other places lower below the ruins there. Those were the industrial schools, and they had to move it because they kept on burning. In 1912 and 1913, there were many fires that were happening at the Boys and the Girls School, and eventually the Jesuits stopped rebuilding them because they saw the pattern, I suppose, but they wouldn't admit it in the writing. And then this is when they decided to move that school to Spanish. And that's what became the Spanish residential school. We've had contributions to the World Wars. We have the Wiikwemkoong Indian days back in the 60s and up to the present. And now we have the Indigenous voice. So I just want to turn to the comments, and there's more that can be added. We should petition the name change. I agree. Visit the site in Shag. Yeah, that's a nice place to visit. There's more to Shag than you would think, and because it's a small town, but obviously it was very important. A quick story too. As part of going to school, we had to do an archaeological dig, and we did one at the Spiegel site, which is at an old beach in Killarney. And when I say old beach, there was this big lake because it was flooded. So we knew that, but it was flooded. And Manitoulin didn't look like it did back then because there would have been only the higher level elevated parts that would have been shown. And so the beach was further back more. So if you're driving in that highway to Killarney, the road to Killarney, the beach was way back. And so we were, you know, maybe a few minutes before Killarney when we started where we went. And if you dig, you know, take off the soil, there's sand. It's like, you know, it's a sandy beach underneath there. And, you know, was digging there and, you know, came across this old fire pit. You could see it, you tell it's a fire pit because it, you know, there's charcoal in the center and then it looks like there's rocks around it. But anyways, the you know, there's some pieces from Chigwenda there, right? So they probably would have collected them from Chigwenda and went to these different places, right? And, you know, coming back to, you know, these petroglyphs and, you know, this evidence that we were here. And even if you look in the ground, there's evidence that we were here, right? And so that's important. And, you know, that's what really put this into place here. So going to Emilio, if the pass and permit system policies were enforced on the island, I've heard stories of having to ask for permission to do things. And so others will know that better than I can. That's a form of that, where you have to ask permission to do things. And even the Indian agent would, and another story, I got to stop telling stories here, but, you know, John Wakagijik, Ronnie's father, was the chief then. And the Indian agent coming from Manitowoc came to the Band Council meeting, and they were speaking Anishinaabe. And the chief had asked, the Indian agent had asked the chief and the council to stop speaking Anishinaabe to speak English so that they could understand things. And they resisted that, and they said that they would continue to do so, and they needed to learn, you know, Anishinaabe if they wanted to know what they were talking about. That's an example of that. So, you know, others will know more about historical accounts being fined or punished in some form. Trading and selling goods other than First Nation members in their community, other First Nation members in another community, non-First Nation residents. Recent, how far back? I don't know, Emilio, how far you're going back. There was, you know, there was that Operation Rainbow or whatever it was called in the 90s when First Nation fishermen were fined for selling fish. There were traders at the time of the gift giving who would, you know, try to sell booze and you know, for the gifts in exchange. Economic impacts. Oh yeah, yes, there is some studies showing loss of land. If you look at the Williams treaties in Southern Ontario as a comparison, you could even look at that now. Like, what is the real estate worth now? And looking at what is that loss and what is it? This is kind of like the Robinson Huron annuities, right? What is the benefit that is given when, you know, all of these taxes pile up and loss of these lands come into play? So, you know, who's ever an economist can figure that one out, right? That's not what I do, but you know that means something. It's I was looking in the real estate ads recently, and the property values are going up. They're increasing, right? So, you know, this is an economic impact that is happening. And so I'll just there'll be a time here to chat at the end here. So I just very quickly here, you know, you might have something to do at 3, and so I'll go a little bit over time, but you know, not that much overtime. You know, Atsokan in the beginning, you know, I just wanted to show this here because, you know, this are photos that I've taken myself. And, you know, when you're out on the land and, you know, you see those clouds forming, you're like, ooh, you know, if you're on a boat, you're like, oh, you know, and, you know, I've had those experiences. If you're out on the water, nature is very powerful. And it is, I just have my res dog barking in the background. Hopefully who's ever out there goes away. But anyways, you know, there's those stories there of the water and the lands and the beings and the power that's there, right? I'm not going to go into those details. I've heard those stories. They're still there, right? And I was wondering one time, like, how did we come about these stories? And I was standing outside in my house here in the winter. I live by the water, and I was listening to the ice form, and you could just hear these, and you've heard this yourself. You could just hear these loud cracks in the ice, like it vibrates and it echoes, and it just makes this loud sound, right? These are these underwater beings there that are part of this, and it just the awesome power of nature that we're surrounded with that came into our stories, right? Nidowajang, Jing, Nidowaning. You know, this is a picture of Manitowoc from that you know, that little where that little plaque is there, and you know, there's a story about, you know, that's the great den of the spirit where the Dowaning comes from, and probably the name of Manitoulin when it was anglicized. And you know, the story that there's these underwater tunnels below the island, and they come up in different areas. You know, I've heard, you know, Quanjal Lake as being in one of those areas, and heard stories even here that, you know, when there's a west wind blowing, and even if there's land, you know, that's blocking it, the water will get cold on the east end of that. So how is that possible, right? So there's probably something going on underneath somehow, like that cool west wind is blowing that, you know. I hear these stories, right? So this is what's going on. And you know, there's stories about, you know, when you cross this bay, you need to be very careful because it could be dangerous. You know, your watercraft can overturn, and the weather can change. And so, you know, these are what I've been talking about in this whole presentation, that are still stories that people tell. You know, I'm not a good storyteller. I'm good at listening to them. I'm not good at retelling them. I maybe I'm good at remembering a little bit about them, and that's what I'm doing here. So I'm just showing that here. If you've gone on the hike there, Babamkoe Trail, and if you've heard Gordy Ojik tell the story, you take his little tour there on his pontoon. He'll talk about, you know, this would be a point where we would watch the Haudenosaunee come, and if they wanted to come to war, right, this would be a lookout point, right? The Naudowek, that we would look out for them here, and Gordy would tells the story better than I can. And so these are, you know, when I look at this, I remember when I went for a hike on this trail for the first time, I remembered what Gordy had told me. And you know, that's important, and hopefully you will remember that and ask Gordy to tell you the story, or others who are good at telling that story. The point being that there's evidence of us, you know, going to war before, you know, Manitoulin became, you know, before 1836, right? There's stories that go back centuries that are still being told, and that's important because we still know these things. Right, and if you're coming to Wiikwemkoong here, there's a cholera epidemic happening, and they put these crosses up, and for recognition of that, and they became, you know, something that the community, you know, affected the community. I just wanted to point out, you know, new spirituality and just new ways of dealing with, not dealing with, experiencing it, and so that's just a part of who we are now, and I have nothing against that. That's just how it is for some of us, and for others, it's something different, and for others, it's not anything at all. So just wanted to recognize that it's just started to change things. I helped out on this project here when this self-guided tour. We helped to put together the language for it. It was intended to be a way of going out on the land and guiding your way around and understanding what this all means. Interesting story I collected. Eugene Mendoba, our past chief, he spent some time living with his aunt, and you'll hear the story as well. We recorded a podcast with him, but he's going to tell that story in that podcast. But he said he lived with his aunt in Buswah, and when the ice formed over, you know, in the wintertime, his aunt, who was Andy, you know, Mendoba's wife at the time, was from Killarney, and she wanted to visit her family. And so Eugene and his aunt put on some skates, and they skated all around towards, you know, Rabbit Island and all the way over to Killarney, and spent the day visiting them, and skated all the way back, you know. And I just, you know, that's almost hard to believe, you know, but that was just the way of life. And, you know, that's how they lived. They got a lot of exercise, and they just did these kinds of things, right? So that's you know, that's you know, when I look at that, it's a new way I used to look at. What we wrote in this plaque is, look for the, you know, the Great Spirit, you may see it, right? I haven't yet saw it, but you know, that's something to look for. But now my new memory of this is that story that Eugene told me about him and his aunt skating over to Killarney, and I just think that's just, you know, awesome. You know, I think it's a while to take a boat there, but you know, that's skating, that's a neat thing. So this is my last slide here, and then coming to the end here, it's at 3 o'clock, but Shkungan, and you know, this is how things are here. I thought, you know, I took this picture a little while back. You know, there's a vehicle there. I tried to you know, maybe I was an aspiring photographer at one point in time. But anyways, I thought that, you know, this interlay between this hydro line coming down and, you know, this truck going about, new transportation, new way of living influenced by power out into that bay, right? Two different stories I've heard of Wiikwemkoong. Either it's the Bay of the Beaver, is one story that I heard, or one translation. I've also heard that, and others will know this better than I do. It means where the hills slope gently down into the bay, or something like that. And if you come, we would travel by water, and if you're coming around, and I heard a story about Art McGregor mentioning this. He told the story of it as well. And, you know, you go by the water here and that's what you see, you know, that's what it looks like, you know, that the hills are slowly, gently rolling down into this bay. And that was one version of the name. And, you know, Jibanoning in, you know, a Killarney, you know, and that's what it looks like, you know, and you come to Killarney, you're going through that wavy part there after Lansdowne Channel. You know, sometimes wonder if you're going to make it, and then you come across and everything's calm, and that means a clear passage, because that's how it looks, right? So we have names for these places and stories of these places. You know, I could say more, but you know, there's only a certain amount of time to work with here. But I had some okay, Biscabing, I had one more, and I took this picture as well. That's an eagle flying over the wiki powwow here. And so it's a time for us to, you know, that was a moment for us to return back. I've heard these stories of it was a challenge to bring these back into the community. And these are what I mean by these laws I was talking about. They had to kind of work in behind the scenes, behind the priest's back, because the priest had an influential role in the community. They had to start to, you know, the powwow and all those kinds of things in secret and make it happen. And even when they told those stories, I heard that they had to be careful when they would tell stories. So if they would talk about stories of the spirit beings, or, you know, the land, or any things that were not conforming to, you know, how things were, then you could get into trouble. Like, you know, not literal trouble, but, you know, you were shamed, right? That you were telling that, you know, that you had to forget that because that's not important. But this is when the powwows were starting and coming back and bringing these all ideas out. I think what the point that I'm trying to bring is that it's the ideas that are important. It's not necessarily, you know, dancing. If you can dance, that's you know, that's good. If you could drum, that's good. For me, my skill at the powwow is having something good to eat and visiting. So that's what I do very well, and that's what my identity at the powwow. But anyways, what I'm trying to bring up here is that this was a time when we are coming back to this time when we need to begin reconnecting with the past and building community, building nationhood, and returning back to how it was, and our knowledge of how that was. And, you know, all of the things that are happening are always part of this. We're not always aware of it, but it always is part of that. So yeah, so, you know, just Brian is recognizing that, you know, I mean, acknowledging that there's some good stories to tell about these things. And, you know, the first beaver was originated from that story from Janeshki. So, you know, there's you know, there's more to say. And I don't consider myself the expert storyteller of these things, because I'm not. Others are. I'm the teacher, right? I just teach about these things, and I teach about what the experts know, and that's what a teacher does. And the teacher is, you know, that's what I do. And so, you know, and this is a neat picture here. This is at Thomas Bay, you know, on a beautiful day. And I think those are my two daughters that have gone for a swim there at that time. And I took a picture of it because it looked neat. A lot of stories around that area too, right? So others can tell those. But the point being here is Atsokan is how we're connected to the land. That's our history. Our history is in the land, right? And it's the story of that land that we keep things flowing. We keep that. That's our education system. We keep it moving ahead And, you know, it's our responsibility to tell those stories and to hold on to those stories. And I remember I was so grateful that Eugene had told stories to us. And I said that my responsibility is to remember what you told me. And I told him that I was grateful for what he shared. He shared many things. You'll hear about it in the podcast, but you'll hear more things about what he had to share. And my responsibility, my thanks to him, was to make sure that others heard those stories that he shared with us, because, you know, someone told him those and stories, and he continued them on, and others have too. Our family members have, right? So this is still there, is what I'm trying to say. This remains, right? These ideas, this connection that goes before the treaties, right? The treaties are the colonization part, but who we are, our identity and our connection to the land is still there, and people still tell these stories, right? And, you know, the dominant story is that, oh, we lost our land, right? And so that's what we're told. It's forced upon us. But it's because it's colonization. That's what that means, right? That's what that in you know, in summary, that's what that means. And this is how the Shkungun came, the reserve came. You know, others have been able to tell this story better than I have about these connections to land. These land stories regenerate, right? So, you know, I'm hoping that you can share what you know with others. It's important. What you're doing is good work. I've shared the little bit that I know. And that I remember from others telling me this. I was just simply there to hear and listen. You know, I'm just a regular Anishinaabe community member, right? And I'm just there like the rest of us, and listening and doing what I can. And when you tell these stories, it's actually a healing effect, right? And you might not know that, but when I hear these stories, it kind of, there's something good that's happening when I hear them, because it heals the damage of these you know, these ideas that we somehow have not done anything worthwhile, that, you know, we benefited from others coming here, and that, you know, we should be grateful. But, you know, it should be the opposite of that, right? And it heals the damage. That's all that's impacting our communities, right? And so, you know, this is, we hope to do something with this work here. And I just kind of gave you a little glimpse of that, what I talked about at the OCF at that time. I didn't have as much time to work with, but that's a preview of some of the work we'd like to do. A couple of us are working on that. We're trying to complete the history, right? We're a territory. We're more than reserves, right? That's what it is. That's a fact, right? There's no way we could have survived on a smaller land base. We needed the bigger land base to continue. Okay, so my last questions to end. Maybe we could just take some general questions or some more comments in the chat here. Maybe we can go for a little bit here, but we have things to do, some of us. So, you know, what do you know of Anishinaabe territories? The question that I had, I shared a little bit about what I have to what I know about that. How do you use territory? You know, I think that I would invite you to use it more. I try my best. You know, I try to learn more, to venture off and to collect some stories. I ask questions, right? Like, who was the family that lived on Haywood Island? And I heard the story, and I'm telling a story now. And some of you know this. There was a family, or a couple who lived there, one of the last surviving couples that lived there, and they would live there year round. And they would have family in Rabbit Island, and they would cross the ice when it was thick enough. But if it was a little bit thinner, they would send their dog, and they would tie a sled to their dog. That dog would run across the ice to the family member in Rabbit Island, and they would put some supplies on the sled, and the dog would run back, right? So they were living there. And there is some there's an old garden that's on Haywood, right? And I'm sharing this because, you know, where I am now and where you are in Wiikwemkoong, you know, Haywood Island's in the middle between where I am and you are, but that's part of our territory, right? There's stories of it. If there's a story of the territory, then it means that it was our territory, right? And how the reserve has changed our way of living, you know, how has that? You know, I've shared some of that, right? We need to be more connected to all of the land and think of ourselves as a nation, and not band members, you know, entitled to services provided by the government on a small plot of land where we are, right? We need to build connections, because that's who we are. Are there any connections with this presentation and the Robinson Huron Treaties annuity settlement negotiations? That's a loaded question, you might say. And yeah, it is intended to be that, because I'm just sitting here listening. Well, not always sitting, but I'm listening, and you hear more of this than I do. I don't go to bingo, so I don't know as much of the stories, and I'm not on Facebook, so that's my problem. So I don't learn as much, but the little that I do learn is it's creating a lot of challenges in our communities. There's a lot of frustration about what this all means. And I just want to acknowledge that that's out there. But, you know, I just would like to say that there's bigger things that we need to be aware of and continue to do. And, you know, a little bit of money here and there is good for us who you know, but there's a bigger picture here. And this is what I mean by more than reserves. We've been in this struggle for a while now, trying to keep control of a knowledge of the past. And many of you are knowledge holders, right? We all are knowledge holders, right? And someday we're all going to be, you know, elders or knowledge holders at some level, right? That doesn't necessarily always mean the ceremony or, you know, a traditional teaching. It means what it means, right? It means this, you know, you might be a knowledge holder of your family history. That's important, right? When I ask questions, I'm always told, oh, go talk to that person will know. And what that means is that, you know what, that person is a recognized expert in that area in the community, and you go talk to that person. We recognize that person as an elder, so they're a knowledge holder, right? They know something. And so I just want to, maybe there's any questions or general conversation we can have now, but I just want to say Chimigwech. This is a bit of a shorter version of what I wanted to talk about. Is planning for 3 hours, so this whole thing here just really was more time to talk, and this shortened version was more of me just trying to get through all of the information. And, you know, I'll encourage you to have a conversation with your family and with your community members about some of these things. And if you know these stories or this knowledge, keep on sharing it, because that's what it is. I would say, you know, Tawny's asking something about there. If we were promised the island, isn't it still ours? I would say that I don't want to, well, I'll say it. So there's more that can be done, you know, if the families who didn't sign, and maybe I'm not a lawyer, so put it that way. I'm not part of the leadership, so I'm just this is the opinion of a community member. If the signatories did not sign that 1862 treaty and did not, you know, declare it surrendered, then I think there's something there. And when, you know, those who still recognize this as unceded territory, I think there's still something there. So I'll put it that way. I believe that, you know, if we didn't surrender, then it means that there's still an opportunity to negotiate something, right? And so that's something that maybe community members can look into. Like I said, I'm here to help as much as I can, you know, but, you know, we all take our responsibilities, like our clan system that we had, and, you know, someone will take on that responsibility and do it for us all, and I'm here to help as much as I can in that way. Naho, Misawe, Chimigwech,
We're awesome. Miigwech.
Yeah.
I just want to say, bang on your last little comments there regarding, you know, you had your question about the 1850, that treaty, annuities treaty. You know, it's more than just about money, right? And I think that's the key that we're trying to figure out here in communications and, you know, messaging with our community and better understanding is, yeah, the money's involved. However, you know, we got to look into, you know, our future, right? And our people and what we foresee for ourselves and our children, grandchildren, and so on and so on. So it's more than just money, but it's that planning, that looking, you know, ahead to the future. So that's what really strikes me. And of course, all the interesting facts in your photos. That's amazing. You're a great storyteller. And that's something that Bentley also mentioned before, is that everybody tells a story differently. So we totally seen your splash on how you share history and story with us. And I say chimigwech to that. Anybody else have comments?
Yeah,
I know we
there's
have
a lot of
great
miigwetches.
chat.
There's lots of
Awesome.
miigwetches, yeah.
Right. Perfect. All right. Okay. Well, I say miigwech again, Daryl, for this awesome session. Yeah, very enlightening. Making me
Yes.
want to learn more.
Just one last parting word. I was talking one time, sitting down with this Mi'kmaq elder academic, and I said to him, I said, when I was done, I said, Jimmy Gwetch. And then he goes, you know, all you in Anishinaabe, you always talk about this Jimmy Gwetch. Who is this guy anyway that you share with? And so I thought that was funny. So I was Jimmy Gwetch.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah. Okay. So,
okay.
Pama Piminoa. We'll see you in Wiki sometime when we cross paths.
You got it. Miigwech, everybody.
Yeah.